Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. My flight out of O'Hare got canceled because of a snowstorm. It was one of those heavy, relentless Midwest storms that come down in thick sheets, coating the windows in slush and turning the runways into a blur of white and blinking lights. The whole terminal had that strange half-asleep feeling, announcements echoing through empty gates, people wrapped in blankets from their carry-ons, others curled up against their luggage. I didn't bother trying to rebook. Everything was grounded until morning. I decided I'd just wait it out in the terminal. By midnight, the airport had gone quiet. Most of the restaurants were closed. Only a couple of vending machines were still humming near gate C-17. The lights dimmed to that overnight glow airports use, bright enough to see, but soft enough to make you feel like you're somewhere between night and morning. A cleaning crew moved slowly down the hall, dragging yellow caution signs behind them. The floors smelled faintly like lemon disinfectant. I found a bench near one of the central gates and tried to sleep, but the constant hum of air vents, the clack of a distant rolling suitcase, and the hard plastic seat made it impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear some distant metallic sound. Doors closing, carts bumping, echoes traveling through the long, empty corridors. It was like the airport had its own heartbeat, something mechanical but alive. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleeping and decided to walk. The place felt endless that late at night. Long stretches of carpet and glass walls showing nothing but blowing snow outside. The few people still around looked like shadows slumped against walls. Most had pulled jackets over their faces. I passed a man sitting cross-legged near a charging outlet, phone screen lighting his face. He didn't look up. I wandered toward the far end of Terminal 1, near some of the United gates that weren't being used that night. I figured it'd be quieter there. The further I went, the quieter it got. The overhead speakers stopped making announcements, and even the cleaning crew noises faded away. The space took on that strange, hollow feeling airports get when empty, like a warehouse too big for the amount of air inside it. I sat down near a big window that looked out over the tarmac. The snow was still falling hard, illuminated by the floodlights outside. You could barely make out the outlines of the planes. Most of them were parked, their wings covered in ice. The glass was cold against my arm when I leaned on it. My breath fogged the window. After a few minutes, I noticed a single figure outside, someone walking near one of the parked planes. It looked like a maintenance guy at first. He was moving slowly between two orange cones set up near the plane's nose. I assumed he was checking something, maybe repositioning them. But after watching for a while, I realized he wasn't moving the cones at all. He was pacing in a straight line between them, back and forth. Same distance each time, hands in his pockets. Head down. He did it for at least 20 minutes. The wind was blowing snow sideways across the lights, and he didn't seem to react to it. Didn't brush it off, didn't hunch his shoulders. Just walked, turned, walked back, over and over. At one point I thought maybe he was waiting for someone or trying to stay warm, but his movements didn't look like that. There was no hesitation, no looking around, just the same measured pace. It started to feel off, not just strange, but out of place. The longer I watched, the more it felt wrong. Like watching a video loop that shouldn't exist in real life. I leaned closer to the glass to get a better look. He wasn't wearing the reflective vest or badge most ground crew had. Just dark clothes, a jacket, pants, maybe gloves. His head stayed down most of the time, and the floodlight behind him made it hard to see details. I could make out his breath in the air, slow and steady, even though it had to be close to 0 degrees out there. Something about that made my stomach tighten. No one should have been out there without proper gear or clearance. And the area he was walking in, past the security fence deep on the tarmac, was restricted. I stood up and moved a little closer to the window, resting my hand against the cold glass. The snow swirled thickly around the plane, distorting my view, but I could still see him. He stopped suddenly mid-stride, Then after a few seconds, he lifted his head. Even from that distance, even through the snow, I could tell he was looking straight at me. The floodlights caught his face enough to make out the shape of it. Bare, expressionless. His eyes reflected the light in a way that didn't seem right, like two dull mirrors. For a moment, we just stood like that, me on one side of the glass, him on the other side of a fence and hundreds of yards of snow. But somehow it felt like he was right in front of me. Then he took a step toward the plane, slow and deliberate. That broke me out of it. I turned around and started walking fast down the corridor toward where I'd last seen a security guard, near the main terminal intersection. My footsteps echoed in the empty hall. The sound made me feel exposed. I half expected to hear another pair behind me, but there was only the dull hum of the air system and the muffled roar of wind outside. When I got back to the main area, there was no one at the security post. The lights there had been dimmed too. I looked around for anyone, cleaning crew, late passengers, anyone in uniform, but the place looked abandoned. The monitors were still on, showing delayed flights, but that was it. I stood there for a while, feeling stupid for panicking. Maybe it had been a real worker. Maybe my eyes were just tired from the light and snow. I told myself that and started walking back toward where I'd been sitting. When I got back to the window, the tarmac looked emptier than before. The snow had piled up higher against the wheels of the plane. The cones were still there, but the man was gone. I scanned the whole area, between the planes, along the fences, even near the maintenance buildings, but I didn't see him. The wind was still blowing hard, snow drifting across the floodlights. I expected to see footprints where he'd been pacing, but there were none. The ground looked smooth, untouched. For a moment I thought maybe the snow had just filled them in, but even with how fast it was falling, there should have been some sign of disturbance, some unevenness, a shadow, something. The cones hadn't shifted either. Everything looked like no one had been there at all. I stayed there for a long time, staring at that spot, trying to reason through it. There were only a few explanations that made sense. Maybe I'd misjudged the distance and the guy had been somewhere else entirely, like near another plane farther down. Maybe he'd walked off behind one of the service trucks. Maybe the snow had erased everything faster than I thought. But none of that felt convincing. The image of him standing there, staring back at me, stuck in my head like a photograph. Eventually, around 3 a.m., exhaustion hit me hard. I moved to a bench near the central hallway again, trying to put it out of my mind. The next time I woke up, the terminal was busier. People were lining up at gates, snow still blowing outside, but lighter now. The early morning announcements had started again. As I packed my stuff and stretched, I glanced out the window one more time. The same plane was still there, now surrounded by ground crew in bright jackets and vests, de-icing trucks spraying the wings. They were walking over the exact same stretch of tarmac where I'd seen the man pacing. One of the workers stopped and knelt down near where the cones had been. Another came over, and the two of them stood there for a while, pointing at something. I couldn't tell what it was from where I was, but they stayed there longer than made sense for routine work. Eventually, they waved someone else over and a truck pulled up. They moved the cones aside and kept working in that area for a while, careful, deliberate. Then the truck left and everything went back to normal. A few minutes later, I boarded my flight. As the plane taxied, I looked out the window, scanning the tarmac as we rolled past that same spot. The snow had been plowed clean. The cones were gone, but there, just visible where the floodlights hit the edge of the cleared area, was a single set of dark, uneven marks in the snow, like a trail that started in the middle of nowhere and ended right up against the fence. And for reasons I can't explain, I knew those hadn't been there the night before. I landed at Schiphol just before noon, after an 8-hour flight from Toronto. The plane rolled to a stop in that quiet, mechanical way planes do. Hissing brakes, the sound of the engines winding down, the faint rustle of people standing before the seatbelt sign even turned off. I was tired but relieved. I'd barely slept on the flight. My head felt heavy and my body stiff. The kind of exhaustion that makes your eyes sting when you blink too long. The air in the cabin was stale, the overhead lights too bright after hours of dimmed darkness. When I stood up to get my carry-on from the overhead bin, I reached for the same spot I'd put it in when we boarded, row 34 right above my seat. But it wasn't there. The compartment was half empty. Just someone's jacket and a plastic bag. I thought maybe a flight attendant had moved it to make space for someone else's luggage. It happens sometimes. I checked the next few overheads in both directions, opening and closing them one by one, but it wasn't anywhere. The people around me looked impatient, trying to squeeze past as I kept searching. Someone muttered something behind me, but I ignored it. I told one of the attendants near the front door as we exited, and she said she'd have it checked once everyone was off the plane. I stepped into the terminal, the rush of cool air from the jet bridge hitting my face. Schiphol always smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Clean, efficient, a little too bright. I waited near the gate while they looked. 15 minutes later, an airport employee came out and told me they didn't find anything on board. They said to go to baggage services downstairs. Customs was quick, just a scan of the passport and a nod from the officer. I passed through without a problem. My checked bag came out almost immediately at Carousel 15, which was at least some relief. I was still holding on to a small hope that my carry-on might appear. Maybe someone had taken it by mistake. The baggage services desk was tucked into a corner near the carousels, a small counter with glass walls and posters about lost and found. The woman there took my information, name, flight number, a description of the bag. It was black, hard shell, a little scuffed from previous trips. Inside, I had my laptop, passport, some clothes, and a few travel documents. She told me to wait near the carousel in case it turned up. I sat down on a metal bench, my backpack beside me, and watched people collect their bags and leave. Families, couples, business travelers, everyone moving with purpose. While I sat there feeling stuck, my sense of direction dulled by jet lag. After about an hour, I saw a man in a yellow vest walking toward me. He was airport staff, holding a clipboard, looking around as if searching for someone. When his eyes met mine, he asked if I was waiting for a missing carry-on. I nodded. He told me they'd found it in a restroom. He brought it out from behind the counter a few minutes later. It looked like mine at first glance. Same model, same scratches, but the zipper was slightly open. When I opened it all the way, my stomach sank. The clothes were there, but not how I packed them. They were folded differently, neater, like someone had repacked it deliberately. My small toiletry kit was missing. My laptop, charger, and passport were gone. The rest, shirts, socks, jeans, looked untouched. Even the book I'd been reading was there, but placed carefully on top instead of wedged on the side where I usually put it. The employee looked confused when I told him what was missing. He asked me to fill out a report. I wrote down everything line by line and signed it. He said airport security would review footage to see who took the bag. I sat there again after that, feeling hollow. Losing a passport abroad is a terrible feeling. It's like losing your identity for a moment. You can't move forward or backward. I tried to stay calm, but my hands were shaking. I hadn't realized how much I relied on that one small bag until it was gone. About 2 hours later, a police officer approached. He had a printed still image from a security camera. A grainy photo of a man walking through the concourse with a black carry-on in his right hand. My carry-on. The man looked calm, like someone heading toward his connecting flight. Dark jacket, jeans, short hair. Nothing unusual. The officer said the footage showed him taking my bag off the plane right after we landed. He blended in with the passengers, walked past customs like everyone else, and then entered a restroom in the e-concourse. That restroom was one of the large ones near the duty-free shops, with several stalls and a few maintenance doors along the back wall. The officer said the man went in there at 12:42 p.m. The cameras outside showed that clearly, but there was no footage of him ever leaving. No one matching his appearance came out. Not by the main door, not by the side service doors. They reviewed every camera angle, every possible exit route. Nothing. When he told me that, I didn't know how to react. At first, I thought maybe the cameras had blind spots. Maybe he changed clothes or slipped out behind someone. But the way the officer said it made it sound different, like they'd checked everything and come up empty. They searched the restroom from top to bottom, each stall, the janitor's closet, the ceiling panels, even the space behind the maintenance doors. No sign of him, just an ordinary restroom empty. The weirdest part was that later, around 2 p.m., one of the cleaners found my bag sitting in a corner of that same restroom, zipped shut again, like someone had quietly put it back. I remember walking down there with the officers when they showed me the area. The e-concourse was quiet at that hour. Long hallways of white tile and low murmurs of people waiting for connecting flights. The restroom was bright and sterile, smelling faintly of air freshener and damp paper towels. There was a faint echo to every sound. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at the row of stalls, thinking about the man just disappearing somewhere inside that space. The officers had already checked everything. They said there were no other entrances or exits, only the one door to the corridor. Even the ventilation shafts were too small for a person. They took statements, filed reports, and told me the case would be investigated further. I got a temporary passport through the consulate a few days later and stayed in Amsterdam longer than planned. But even after I left, that image stayed with me. The man with my bag walking into the restroom, calm, unhurried, like he had every right to be there. I kept thinking about how easily it happened, how in that brief gap between landing and disembarking, someone could take a bag, walk through security, and vanish in one of the most monitored airports in the world. I replayed it in my head over and over, how my bag was gone from the overhead, how no one saw anything strange. Months later, I got an email from Schiphol police saying the case was still open. No identification, no trace of the man. They'd checked his face through databases and passenger manifests. Nothing matched. They even compared timestamps to see if he might have exited another terminal. But the cameras covered every corridor. He simply wasn't there. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Either someone had found a way to slip through the cracks of one of the most secure airports in Europe, or something else was going on, something hidden, something the airport didn't want to explain in full. I never got my laptop or passport back. The police told me to assume they were gone for good. I bought a new carry-on before my next trip, but since then, I've never let it out of my sight. Not even for a second. Every time I'm at an airport now, especially when I walk past restrooms, I glance at the door and think about that man walking in with my bag. I wonder what happened to him, what he was doing, why he chose mine, and where he went after that. Sometimes, when I think about it too much, I can almost see it in my head. The bright white tiles, the silence, the sound of a door swinging shut and not opening again. Just one man, one bag, and a space where something stopped making sense. And somewhere inside that ordinary airport restroom, for a few hours, the line between being seen and not seen disappeared completely. My bag came back, but he never did. I was sitting in a quiet corner of Terminal C, waiting for a connecting flight to Denver. It was one of those long layovers where you've already walked through every shop and eaten something you didn't want, just to kill time. My flight wasn't for another 3 hours, and most of the gates were packed. The seats near the charging ports were all taken, people half asleep or scrolling endlessly through their phones. I kept walking until I found Gate 23. The sign above it read, "Closed for cleaning," but it was empty, silent, and the seats looked more comfortable than anywhere else. No one seemed to care that the signs had closed. The area was roped off on one side, but the chairs near the windows were open. I slipped through and sat down by the window facing the dark runway. The place had that low hum airports always have. Distant machinery, muffled announcements echoing off the walls, a kind of steady background noise that never stops. It felt peaceful compared to the rest of the terminal. Out beyond the glass, the tarmac lights shimmered in the distance, tiny blinking reds and blues cutting through a haze of exhaust and cold air. The windows were slightly fogged from the inside, and condensation ran down in slow lines. I put my bag down on the chair next to me and leaned back, just listening. There was a cleaning cart parked near the gate desk, a dull gray mop bucket half full of cloudy water, a small yellow sign folded open on the floor. The cleaner was an older woman, maybe in her 60s. She wore a green vest with reflective strips and had her hair tucked under a white cap. I remember she moved quietly, methodically, dipping the mop and swiping in long, even strokes. I nodded at her once when she passed near me. She didn't look up or respond, just kept working, dragging the mop in slow lines near the windows. I figured she was tired, working the late shift. It was past midnight by then. Most of the stores were closed, and the overhead announcements had stopped. After a while, I pulled out my phone and checked the time. Still hours to go. I started scrolling through the flight tracker app just out of boredom, and that's when I heard it again. The faint squeak of a mop bucket wheel turning on the tile. It came from just behind me, that familiar sound of rubber against the floor, slow and uneven. I looked up expecting to see her again, maybe finishing up near the other end of the gate, but there was no one there. The bucket was still by the window, the mop leaning against the wall. The handle glistened under the overhead lights, dripping water onto the tile. I stared at it for a second, thinking maybe she'd gone to the restroom or stepped into the service corridor behind the counter. I waited a minute or two listening. The squeaking had stopped. All I heard now was the faint buzz of fluorescent lights and a plane taxiing somewhere outside. I looked up at the gate monitor, just out of habit. The screen, which had been blank before, now showed something. It flickered once and came to life. Flight 1482, boarding. The letters were dim, like the monitor hadn't been used in years. I frowned, pulled out my phone again, and checked the app. There was no Flight 1482 listed anywhere. No departures, no arrivals, nothing. I double-checked the airport code, refreshed it twice. Nothing. I stared back at the monitor. It stayed lit for maybe 10 seconds before flickering again and going completely dark. I remember this quiet feeling settling in. Not fear exactly, but confusion mixed with a sense that something was off. The kind of silence where even small noises sound too loud. I picked up my backpack and thought maybe I shouldn't be there. The sign had said closed after all. I turned toward the concourse, but no one else was around. The vending machines down the hall hummed softly, and the overhead signs glowed blue. Every other gate had some kind of noise, boarding calls, laughter, a rolling suitcase. But Gate 23 felt cut off, like it existed slightly outside the rest of the terminal. The smell was strange too. Not bad, just different. A faint chemical smell, like cleaning fluid mixed with something musty. I assumed it was just from the mop water. The tile near the bucket was still damp. There were streaks of gray water leading away from it, but the streaks didn't end anywhere. They just stopped in the middle of the floor. I stared at them for a while, thinking maybe she'd wheeled the bucket away and come back. But the bucket hadn't moved. It was right where it had been when I sat down. The handle hadn't shifted. The water still rippled slightly, like it had just been stirred. I sat there for another few minutes, trying to distract myself by scrolling through photos on my phone. I could feel how quiet the space was. The kind of quiet where even your breathing sounds like it doesn't belong. After maybe 10 minutes, I heard footsteps from down the hall. A TSA officer in a dark uniform came walking toward the gate, his radio clipped to his shoulder. I figured he was coming to check the area, maybe tell me to move. He stopped near the counter and looked around. I stood up and told him I'd just been waiting for my connection, that I thought it was okay to sit there, since the area was open. He didn't say anything for a second, just looked toward the window where the mop bucket was sitting. He frowned slightly, then asked if I'd seen anyone else there. I told him about the cleaning woman, the one with the green vest, how she'd been mopping near the windows when I arrived. I described her, older, short gray hair, green vest, white cap. He stared at me for a long time before finally saying the gate wasn't supposed to be open. He said the section had been closed off for renovation and asbestos removal since 2020. He said no staff were assigned there, no cleaning crew, no power connected to that monitor anymore. I looked back toward the screen, but it was blank again. The light above it had gone out, leaving that corner of the gate darker than before. I didn't really know what to say. I just felt stupid standing there. My backpack slung over one shoulder, the sound of my own breathing suddenly too loud in my ears. The TSA guy walked over to the mop bucket and crouched down beside it. He touched the rim, looked inside, then looked back at me. He didn't say much else, just told me again to leave the area, that it wasn't safe to be there during maintenance. I nodded and walked back toward the main concourse, feeling the warmth of the crowd hit me again like a wave. When I got back to the main terminal, the noise and movement felt almost overwhelming. People were talking, kids were crying, luggage wheels clicked across the floor. I sat near gate 19 and plugged in my phone, still thinking about what I'd just seen. I tried to convince myself that I'd misunderstood something, that maybe another cleaner had come through, or maybe the gate had been opened temporarily and no one had updated the system. Airports are full of weird little logistical gaps like that. But the part that stayed in my head was the monitor, that old flickering screen lighting up with a flight number that didn't exist. When my boarding time finally came, I walked past gate 23 again on my way to the restroom. The area was roped off now. The yellow cleaning sign was gone. The lights were off except for one dim overhead bulb near the counter. I stopped for just a second, trying to look through the glass. The mop bucket wasn't there anymore and the floor was dry. I didn't see any movement inside, just the faint reflection of the runway lights in the window. I got on my flight to Denver, trying not to think about it anymore. But halfway through the flight, I opened the airline's mobile app again. Out of habit, I scrolled through the departure list from the airport. Near the bottom, mixed among the delayed and canceled flights, there was a listing that caught my eye. Flight 1482. It showed as canceled, gate closed. No airline code, no time, no destination. Just that, canceled, gate closed. I checked again when I landed in Denver. It was gone. Deleted from the list entirely. I've been through that same airport 3 times since, and gate 23 has always been sealed. Lights off, covered in plastic sheeting and scaffolding. No chairs, no monitors, no cleaning carts. Just the reflection of the other gates in its dark windows. I still don't know what I saw that night. Maybe there was some temporary power surge. Or maybe my mind filled in the blanks out of boredom and fatigue. Airports are strange places late at night. You're surrounded by people, but it feels empty, disconnected. Like time doesn't work quite the same way there. But every time I pass a gate with a closed for cleaning sign now, I keep walking. Even if the seats look comfortable, even if it's quiet, especially if it's quiet. I used to work lost luggage claims for American Airlines at Dallas-Fort Worth. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly paperwork, filling forms, matching baggage tag numbers, logging missing items. But it paid well enough and the night shifts were quiet. I liked the quiet. After the last big wave of arrivals around 10:30 or 11 p.m., the place would empty out. The hum of the conveyor belts, the dull echo of my shoes on the polished floor, the distant sound of cleaning machines, those became the soundtrack of my nights. That night started like any other. I was at my desk near the far end of baggage claim, going through the daily report. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, and the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and rubber from the carousels. The last incoming flight for that section had landed at 8:45 p.m., and the passengers were long gone. I had maybe half an hour left before my shift ended. At 10:58, the phone rang. I remember the exact time because I had been typing in a claim about a lost duffel from a flight out of Miami. The call display just showed unknown. I answered it like I always did. The voice on the other end was a man's, calm but firm. He said he was calling about his wife's suitcase, a black Samsonite with a red tag, that was still on the carousel. That didn't make sense. I checked the system on my screen. No flights had arrived in Carousel Section 4 since before 9 p.m. Nothing was active. No recent unloads. No bags still circulating. I told him I'd double-check, but before I could say much more, he hung up. I got up from my desk and looked across the hall. The flight 1482 was still in the air, but it was quiet. I checked the system on my screen. No flights had arrived in Carousel Section 4 since before 9 p.m. Nothing was active. No recent unloads. No bags still circulating. I told him I'd double-check, but before I could say much more, he hung up. Most of the lights over the carousels were dimmed, just enough to see the signs and numbers. The automatic doors leading outside were closed. The big monitor still listed the last flights: Phoenix, Chicago, Los Angeles, all completed. I walked down the hall toward Carousel 4. My footsteps echoed sharply in the emptiness. The cleaning crew had already gone through that area earlier. The floor was streaked with mop water that reflected the overhead lights in uneven lines. The metal sides of the carousel were cold when I brushed against them, and then I saw it, one bag, just one, a single black suitcase turning slowly on the moving belt. It looked ordinary at first, medium-sized, hard shell, scuffed corners. The red tag on the handle caught the light each time it passed under a bulb. It was strange, though, seeing it rotate alone, in an area that hadn't seen passengers for hours. The belt wasn't supposed to be running at all. I stood there for a while, just watching it go around. The sound of the motor was louder than I remembered. The tag flapped each time it passed the loading section. The rest of the carousels were completely still. Eventually, I stepped up to the belt, grabbed the handle, and lifted the suitcase off. It was lighter than I expected, almost empty. The tag was bright red with no airline logo, just a worn piece of laminated plastic tied on with string. I carried it over to my desk and placed it on the counter. I scanned the barcode on the luggage tag, but the system came back blank. I tried again manually, typed in the digits, and got no record found. That's rare, but not impossible. Sometimes bags get relabeled or swapped. I checked the manual logs for unclaimed luggage, and there was no entry for that description. I tried calling the number back. The one from the unknown caller. It rang once, then went to silence. No voicemail, no disconnect tone, nothing. I set the phone down and stared at the suitcase. We're supposed to leave unregistered baggage sealed until a supervisor's there, but it was almost end of shift. And the rule is to inspect any item that doesn't match a record, in case of security risk. So I put on gloves, unzipped the case, and flipped it open. Inside was nothing except an old laminated ID badge. The badge looked official but outdated, the kind of badge airport staff used in the 90s. It had the old American Airlines logo, faded and cracked. The name was worn off completely, just a dark smudge where the letters used to be. The photo was still visible, though. A man standing in front of a baggage carousel. The background looked identical to the one where I had found the suitcase. The same metallic rails, the same beige tiles on the wall. The badge had an issue date, 1996. I set it aside, checked the rest of the bag carefully. Nothing else. No clothes, no documents, not even dust inside. It looked freshly cleaned. I filled out a found luggage report manually, noting the missing record, no barcode match, one ID badge inside. Then I locked the suitcase in the inspection closet and went to log the event with the night supervisor. He was upstairs finishing some paperwork of his own. When I told him, he frowned, said no late flight had used Carousel 4 that night, and no cleaning crew had reported anything unusual. He looked through the report I'd filled, then told me to leave the bag where it was and go home. I clocked out, went to the parking lot, and sat in my car for a few minutes. The image of the ID badge kept coming back to me. The photo, the old logo, the empty carousel behind that man. I didn't recognize the face. I didn't recognize the background either. Yet something about it felt too recent, like the photo had been taken not decades ago but days ago. When I came back the next night, the first thing I did was check the inspection closet. The bag was still there, sealed, exactly where I'd left it. I decided to ask around. Most of the older staff had been around since the early 2000s. None of them remembered any employee with a missing badge from the 90s. But one of the security officers said something that stuck with me. He told me there'd been a small baggage area fire in '96, electrical short supposedly, and one worker had been injured. The old section where it happened had been remodeled years later. I asked which area it had been. He pointed toward the same end of the terminal I worked in. The next few nights I noticed something else. Every now and then the carousel would start moving on its own. Not constantly, not at any set time, just once or twice each week. I'd hear the faint hum of the belt from my desk, go check and find it running empty. No bags, no arrivals. Just the belt slowly turning under the lights. Maintenance said it was probably a sensor issue. The system can sometimes think there's weight on the belt when there isn't. They checked the wiring and replaced a relay, but it happened again 2 nights later. I stopped reporting it. A few days after that, the suitcase was gone. I don't know who signed it out. The log sheet had no new entry, no initials. The key for that closet is supposed to stay with the supervisor, but he swore he hadn't taken it. I checked every unclaimed luggage area in the terminal, nothing. The ID badge was gone too. I stayed in that job for another year. Things went back to normal mostly. Late nights, quiet hours, paperwork. The same mechanical hum of belts and air vents. But every time I passed Carousel 4, I'd glance at the belt just to make sure it was still. One night, maybe 6 months later, I was sorting reports and noticed something odd on one of the claim forms from another employee. It listed an unclaimed item found near Carousel 4, a black Samsonite with a red tag. No record in system, no barcode. Same words I had written. I pulled the file and checked the attached photo. The suitcase looked identical. The report date was 3 weeks old. The supervisor on duty that night was new and hadn't filed any follow-up. The bag had vanished again before inspection. After that, I stopped looking into it. Baggage claim areas have their own kind of silence. They feel harmless when crowded, but once the passengers leave, that space changes. It's too bright, too empty, too clean. The belts stretch in long black circles under fluorescent lights that hum just a little too loud. Every sound echoes. Every reflection moves. You start to notice things you shouldn't. The faint vibration of a motor that isn't running. The low rumble of a belt you didn't turn on. I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that, but I do know airports have layers of history buried under their updates and remodels. Old systems, old rooms, old staff records that don't always match what's still standing. Things get lost. Bags, people, paperwork. And sometimes they surface again years later looking just as they did when they disappeared. I transferred out of lost luggage not long after. I still work for the airline, but now I handle operations in a different terminal. Every now and then I still get calls about missing bags. Most of them are routine, misrouted, delayed, wrong tag, wrong flight. But sometimes, in the quiet hours when the phones barely ring and the belt sits still, I'll think about that suitcase. The way it moved in circles long after it should have stopped. The empty tag, the badge from 1996. And I'll wonder how many things in that building are still moving long after the people who use them are gone. I was traveling for work. A short overnight trip from Houston to Chicago for a meeting the next morning. I'd done this route dozens of times. I knew the airport layout, knew how long security usually took, knew where to grab a coffee near the gate before boarding. I checked in around 10:30 p.m., my carry-on packed with just clothes, my laptop, and a few files. My flight was at 12:15 a.m., one of those late-night departures that never leave quite on time. Security was quiet that night. Most lanes were empty, a few families coming off late connections, and a handful of business travelers like me. When I got to the TSA line, one of the officers motioned me aside as I placed my things in the tray. "Random check," he said, which wasn't unusual. It happens often enough. I stood there while he swabbed my laptop, my hands resting on the counter edge, my eyes half focused on the conveyor belt pulling bags through the scanner. The officer fed the swab into a small gray machine, waited, then frowned slightly. He didn't say anything, just looked over at another agent a few feet away and gave a small nod. The second agent came over and told me to step into a glass inspection room next to the line. I'd been in one before, just a small enclosed area with a metal chair, a narrow counter, and glass walls on 3 sides. I could see everything going on outside. Travelers moving through security, officers talking, the constant low hum of conveyor belts and plastic trays clattering. The door clicked behind me as the agent left. I waited. I wasn't worried. Stuff like this happens sometimes. False positives from residue or just random checks that take longer than expected. After about 5 minutes, I noticed the officer who'd swabbed my laptop hadn't come back. The second agent I'd spoken to was gone too. The line outside kept moving. I could see people collecting their bins and walking off toward the gates. I kept expecting someone to open the door and tell me I was clear, but no one did. I sat down in the chair, checked my watch, 12:05 a.m., and waited some more. Around 12:20, I started getting restless. I tapped on the glass once, but no one looked. I could still see passengers walking through, but the TSA staff seemed to have changed out. A few were new faces I hadn't seen earlier. I thought maybe they'd forgotten about me. I stood up and paced the small space, checked my phone for messages, but I noticed something strange. No signal. Not even one bar. I tried connecting to airport Wi-Fi, but the network list was empty. Just no networks found. I sat back down, staring at the gray floor, thinking I should probably just wait it out. They'd come back soon, but then time kept dragging. 10 minutes turned into 20. I checked my watch again, 12:40. I started to feel uneasy. The steady noise outside seemed to fade, like fewer people were around. I pressed my forehead against the glass to look out farther down the checkpoint lanes, and what I saw didn't make sense. There was no one in line anymore. No noise, the belts were stopped. The light seemed slightly dimmer, like the brightness had been turned down halfway. The screens that normally showed "enter here" or "wait" above the scanners were blank. I didn't hear any voices. I knocked on the glass harder, just to see if anyone was nearby. Nothing. The echo of my knock sounded too loud. I looked down at my phone again. Still no signal. I felt this small wave of confusion rising in my chest. That quiet panic that builds slowly, when you realize something isn't right but you can't figure out what exactly. I tried the door handle. It opened easily. When I stepped out, the air felt different, cooler, still. I expected someone to yell at me for leaving the room, but there was no one there. The entire TSA checkpoint was empty. The belts weren't moving. The bins were piled up at the ends and all the stations were dark. Only a few overhead lights were on, just enough to see by. I walked along the lane, calling out once, no answer. The strangest thing was how quiet it was. Airports are never silent, even at night. There's always an announcement. A cart beeping, someone dragging a suitcase. But here it was, just a low mechanical hum, like ventilation or something deep in the walls. I looked at my watch again, 3:12 a.m. I froze for a second. That couldn't be right. I'd only been in that room maybe half an hour, 40 minutes at most. I checked the clock on my phone. It said the same thing, 12 a.m. I walked faster toward the main terminal area, past the rows of idle scanners and silent podiums. As I moved past the last TSA post, I looked back once, expecting someone to appear, to call out, to stop me, but the area stayed completely still. When I reached the main terminal, the lights were on, but it felt abandoned. A few janitorial carts were parked near the restrooms, but no workers. Every screen above the gate said the same thing: departure, delayed, or no current flights. I walked to my gate area, trying to make sense of it, but my flight wasn't even listed anymore. I sat down in one of the empty chairs, trying to process everything. My boarding pass was in my pocket, folded. I took it out just to double-check the time and gate, but the status line on it had changed somehow. It said, "Status void, screening incomplete." The print looked newer than before, like it had been updated. That's when the confusion turned into something heavier. I had my bag, my laptop, all my stuff. No one had stopped me or taken anything. I hadn't cleared security officially, yet here I was, sitting past the checkpoint, free to walk anywhere in the terminal. I walked toward the main concourse, trying to find anyone, security, maintenance, anyone, but the whole place was silent. The moving walkways were off. The vending machines glowed softly but didn't respond when I pressed the buttons. Even the restaurants were dark, chairs stacked on tables. I must have walked for 15, maybe 20 minutes before I finally saw someone. A man in a yellow vest far down the hall, standing near a cart. I waved and started toward him, but when I got close enough, I saw he wasn't moving. It was just a vest draped over a cleaning sign. No one there. I felt dizzy. My body didn't know what to do, run, stop, shout. I ended up walking straight to the main exit of the terminal, half expecting alarms to go off when I passed through the doors. Nothing happened. Outside, the pickup lanes were quiet too. A few empty cabs parked, engines off, no drivers. The glass doors behind me slid shut, and for a moment I just stood there, breathing the cold night air, trying to anchor myself to something real. The parking garage lights glowed across the road. Somewhere far off, a truck engine started, echoing in the distance. That sound alone was enough to remind me the world was still working out there. I found my car in long-term parking, drove out of the lot without anyone checking my ticket. The gate arm lifted automatically. The whole drive to the hotel, I kept glancing at my watch, still showing 3:42 a.m., and wondering how those 3 hours had just disappeared. The next morning, I logged into my airline account to check if my flight had been rescheduled. It wasn't listed anywhere in my past trips. When I searched the flight number, it showed as canceled at 12:10 a.m., 5 minutes before I was even pulled aside. My boarding pass still showed the void status, time-stamped at 12:03 a.m. Later that afternoon, I called the TSA regional office. They checked their logs. According to them, no secondary screening had been recorded for me that night. My boarding pass had been flagged for random inspection, but it was marked as incomplete. Passenger did not proceed to screening area. They had no record of me ever entering the checkpoint after 11:55 p.m. I didn't know what to say. I had gone through it. I'd been there. I'd seen the machine, the officer, the swab, the glass room. I had my laptop, my ID, my bag. Everything exactly as it had been when I placed it on the tray. I went back to the airport 2 days later before my return flight. Same terminal, same checkpoint. It looked completely normal, crowded, noisy, alive. I stood near that glass room for a minute. It was being used by an agent for bag checks. Everything was as it should be. But when I looked down the line to where I'd been standing that night, something small caught my eye. A piece of blue tape stuck to the floor beside the conveyor belt, marked with a faded number. 1203, I don't know what it meant, or if it had anything to do with what happened. Maybe it was just maintenance, a timestamp, a random mark. But when I saw it, something in me tightened. I stepped over it quickly and walked straight to my gate, never looking back. I still travel for work, but I haven't taken another midnight flight since then. Every time I go through security now, I glance toward those glass rooms and feel that same quiet unease. Like maybe, if the timing had been just a little different, I might have never stepped out at all. The storm had started sometime after 9 p.m., when I was supposed to be boarding my connecting flight to Edinburgh. I'd come in from Frankfurt earlier that evening, and gate A18 was where my next leg was supposed to leave from. By 10, the rain was coming down so hard that it blurred the glass completely. You couldn't even see the runway lights anymore. Just a dull orange haze in the dark. I remember the sound most of all, that low hum of the storm mixing with the air conditioning, and the occasional wheel of a suitcase dragging by. The airport was full of stranded people, half of them pacing between vending machines and half slumped in the seats like they'd given up. I kept checking the screen above the gate. British Airways 2264, Edinburgh 2245, delayed. Every 10 minutes the time pushed forward. The gate agent looked tired, like she'd said the same sentence 50 times already. Around 11:30 the storm got worse. You could hear the thunder rolling far off but still feel the vibration in the floor every time it hit. The overhead lights flickered a few times, and people laughed nervously. It was one of those late-night travel lulls where everyone's too exhausted to complain. By midnight, the terminal had thinned out. A few passengers stretched across seats using their jackets as pillows. I was still at A18 scrolling my phone, trying to pass the time. That's when the screens flickered again. It was strange. Every one of them across the concourse went black at the same time. The one behind the counter, the big central one showing all departures, even the small ones by the bathrooms. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, just long enough for the noise in the terminal to die down completely. When they came back on, my flight's line had changed. The screen read, "Delayed, new time TBD." That was it. No gate, no estimate, nothing. Just that one phrase. The few people left around the gate groaned or swore quietly, then drifted away toward other parts of the terminal. Some probably went to find food or check the service desks. I stayed where I was. My charger was plugged into the wall near a trash can, and I didn't feel like losing the outlet. After a while, maybe 20 minutes, I noticed something strange. The general noise of the airport, the background chatter, announcements, distant hum had faded. Usually, even in the middle of the night, you hear the automated voices repeating boarding calls, security reminders, keep your belongings with you every few minutes. But now it was silent except for the storm hitting the glass. I pulled out one earbud just to make sure. Nothing. No announcements at all. The lighting felt a little dimmer, too. It wasn't a power outage. It was like they'd lowered it by a fraction. Just enough that everything looked softer and slightly off color. You could see the reflections of the overhead lights stretching faintly across the wet floor tiles. I remember thinking maybe they'd switch to overnight mode, but something about it didn't feel right. There were too few people around. Then, from the far end of the concourse, I saw movement. A woman in a dark suit walking fast with a carry-on, heading straight past the closed newsstand toward a side corridor marked "Authorized Personnel Only." A few seconds later, a man came jogging behind her, also carrying nothing but a backpack. They both reached the same maintenance door, and without swiping a badge or scanning anything, it just clicked open for them. They went through and it shut quietly. I stared at that door for a while. I'd passed it earlier, and I remembered it had a red light and a keypad. I figured maybe they worked for the airline or maintenance, but neither of them looked like staff. They looked like passengers in a hurry who somehow knew where they were going. I decided to ask someone at the counter what was going on, but when I walked up, the gate was empty. No agent, no papers, no leftover coffee cup, nothing. The monitors behind the counter were blank again. I waited there for a bit, then leaned over slightly to look into the small office behind the desk. The lights were on, but the chairs were empty. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I tried walking down toward the next few gates, A19, A20, but it was the same. Empty. The seats were still full of half-drunk coffee cups, jackets left behind, open magazines, but no people. The few that had been around earlier were gone. I pulled out my phone and tried to check the airport Wi-Fi page for the flight info, but the departures section wouldn't load, just a spinning circle. Cellular signal was weak too, probably because of the storm. When I turned back toward A18, I froze for a moment. The big departure board in the middle of the concourse had gone completely black. Every single flight listing was gone, just a dark reflective surface like a mirror. I walked closer, thinking maybe it was another flicker, but no, everything was blank. The smaller monitors at the gates were blank too. I felt the kind of cold that starts in your stomach and spreads up your spine. It wasn't fear exactly, it was confusion. Like I'd missed an announcement that everyone else had heard. I tried to reason it out. Maybe they'd evacuated a section for maintenance or weather control. Maybe everyone had been moved to another concourse. But why hadn't anyone said anything? The silence was heavy now. I could still hear the rain hitting the glass, but it was steady, not loud. My footsteps echoed as I walked toward the center of the terminal. Every shop was closed, security shutters down, lights off behind the counters. The only thing still running was the conveyor belt at baggage claim, far enough away that it sounded like a low mechanical hum. I sat back down at A18, trying to figure out what to do next. My phone finally caught a bar of signal, so I opened my airline app. When I searched my flight number, BA2264, it said flight not found. I tried again, and it showed no scheduled flights under that number. I checked the British Airways website directly. Same result. I thought maybe they'd changed the number or canceled it due to weather, so I opened my email to see if there was an update. There wasn't. The last message I had was from earlier in the evening confirming the gate assignment. I decided to walk toward the main terminal, thinking maybe someone at the customer service desk could explain it. The moving walkway wasn't running, just frozen mid-motion, so I had to walk along it. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly. I passed empty seating areas, vending machines humming quietly, a few luggage carts abandoned near the walls. The whole terminal felt drained of people, but not abandoned long enough to feel dead. It was that in-between state, recently vacated but still humming. When I reached the main info desk, it was deserted. A few papers were scattered across the counter, and a half-filled water bottle stood next to a computer that was turned off. Behind the counter, a small TV showed static. I tried calling the number listed on the sign, customer service, but it went straight to a busy signal. I stood there for a few minutes, staring at the empty corridor leading to security. The metal detectors were dark. Beyond them, the lights were dimmer, fading into shadow near the escalators. It felt wrong to go that way. Something told me to stay in the lit area. I turned back once more toward A18, and I swear the monitors that had been black before were now completely off. No power light, no faint glow, nothing. The whole concourse looked darker than before. I didn't wait any longer. I grabbed my bag and followed the exit signs toward baggage claim, thinking I could find an information desk near arrivals. The automatic doors didn't open right away. I had to push them slightly before the sensor caught. The air beyond was colder, and the noise of the rain was louder. When I finally made it to the main hall, a janitor was mopping near a column. I felt this sudden relief just seeing someone else there. I asked him if British Airways flights were still going out. He looked at me like he didn't understand, then said the last British Airways flight had left hours ago. I told him I'd been waiting at A18 for BA 2264 to Edinburgh. He frowned slightly and said there hadn't been any Edinburgh flights scheduled tonight. He even pointed toward the flight board behind him. It listed departures through the rest of the night. There was no 2264, no Edinburgh, nothing close to it. I thought he was mistaken, so I showed him the confirmation email, but when I opened it, it was blank. The header still said British Airways, but the body of the message was just white space. No flight details, no time, no gate number. Later, when I called the airline directly, they told me there was no record of a flight 2264 on any schedule. Not that it was canceled, just that it didn't exist. To this day, I still don't understand what happened. I'd been at that gate for hours, sitting under a monitor that clearly displayed my flight number. I saw other passengers waiting for it. I saw the delay message. I even watched the board listed as new time TBD. But when the storm passed and the lights came back up, everything was gone, like the entire flight had been erased from the system. I still have the boarding pass printout from Frankfurt to BA 2264, Edinburgh. It's worn and faded now, but it's real. I keep it in a drawer, mostly to remind myself that it actually happened. That I didn't imagine waiting there all night while the storm drowned out the world outside. The next morning, when I finally got another flight out, I walked past gate A18 again. The door was closed, lights off inside. There was a sign taped to the counter. Out of service, maintenance. The keypad next to the authorized personnel-only door was blinking red. Whatever happened that night, whether it was a glitch, a reroute, or something else entirely, it left me with one clear memory: the silence of that terminal. No voices, no announcements, no trace of where everyone went. Just me, the storm outside, and a flight that officially never existed. My uncle had worked airport security at JFK for almost 20 years. He was one of those quiet, steady people who never got rattled. The type that could stand in the middle of chaos and still think straight. One Thanksgiving when I was about 24, he invited me to come along for his overnight shift. I didn't have much family around that year, and he said it'd be quiet anyway. Mostly cargo flights and refueling, nothing like the chaos of daytime. I thought it would be interesting to see how an airport looked when most of the terminals went dark. We arrived around 9 p.m. The parking lots were mostly empty, the air cold and damp from the rain that had passed through earlier in the evening. The terminals glowed from a distance, but the farther we drove onto the service roads, the quieter it got. Cargo trucks rumbled occasionally, and lights from distant taxiways flickered in the low fog. Inside the security office, the shift supervisor was watching monitors, rows of cameras showing everything from loading bays to empty concourses. The fluorescent lights hummed, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. For the first few hours, nothing really happened. My uncle showed me around, badge gates, service tunnels, and the outer perimeter roads that looped around the airport property. The night felt endless. Every so often, we'd stop by a checkpoint and chat with the guards, most of them tired and half asleep in their booths. Around 2:30 a.m., the fog thickened outside, and the radio chatter got quieter. It was that part of the night where everything feels suspended. Like time itself slows down. At 3:07 a.m., a silent alarm tripped in one of the old maintenance hangars, C-12, near the far western side of the property. It wasn't used anymore, my uncle said. It used to belong to a maintenance contractor that worked on wide-body aircraft, but the company had moved years ago. The structure was still standing, though, part of the airport's boundary area, fenced off and mostly forgotten. A few security checks happened there every month just to make sure it wasn't being used by squatters or raccoons. We took one of the patrol SUVs and drove out there. The service road wound past the fuel farm, then along the edge of the long runways where we could see the runway lights disappearing into the fog. The air outside looked like it had a physical texture, thick and gray, and the headlights only cut a few meters ahead. The hangar eventually appeared as a long, dark shape ahead, metal siding streaked with rust and years of weather. One single floodlight on a pole flickered above the side entrance, buzzing faintly. The big sliding doors were shut, but the smaller personnel door beside them was slightly open. That alone was strange because all doors there were supposed to be locked and sealed. My uncle parked and left the engine running. The headlights caught dust motes and bits of debris swirling in the air. It was dead quiet except for the low hum of the vehicle. When he pushed the door open, the hinges groaned. Inside, the air was colder. It smelled like old oil, hydraulic fluid, and dust, an industrial scent that never really goes away in those places. Our flashlight swept across the concrete floor. There were still old maintenance lifts, tool cabinets, and an empty scaffolding platform near the center. Some corners were covered in sheets of plastic that had gone gray from age. Everything looked undisturbed, just layers of dust everywhere. But about 20 feet in, my uncle stopped. The beam of his flashlight landed on something lying on the floor near one of the tool benches. A laminated ID badge. It was clean. Not just clean, but new-looking. The plastic reflected the light sharply, not dulled like something that had been sitting around for years. It had a Delta logo on it, the photo of a middle-aged man in uniform, his name printed clearly below. The badge wasn't cracked, dirty, or even scuffed. It looked like someone had dropped it minutes ago. My uncle picked it up carefully. He stared at it for a long moment, then told me to stay put while he radioed in the find. The name on the badge matched someone currently employed at the airport, a ground crew member working in Terminal 2. According to the system, that same employee had badged into a secure gate about 2 hours earlier, at 1:05 a.m. The system even showed him still inside that zone, but the ID we held was active too. When my uncle scanned it with his handheld device, it beeped and came back as valid and current. No duplication error, no flag. 2 identical active credentials, both tied to the same person, both in different places at once. We stayed in the hangar for a while longer, sweeping the area with our lights. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints in the dust, no new tire tracks outside, nothing moved out of place. It was as if the badge had just materialized there. The silence pressed in harder the longer we stayed. It wasn't a haunted feeling, just a heavy mechanical stillness that made you aware of every breath you took. When we finally stepped outside, the fog had gotten thicker. The floodlight flickered again, and the distant hum of the terminals felt miles away. We locked the door and sealed it with a tag for the maintenance team to inspect later. On the drive back, my uncle kept checking the rearview mirror like he was expecting to see something behind us. He didn't say much, but I could tell it bothered him. Back at the security office, he pulled up the system logs. The name on that badge showed up twice in two separate locations within seconds of each other. Once from the physical ID we found, and once from the one the employee still had. Both records read as authentic. No indication of cloning, no error message. The IT system confirmed that the badge ID numbers were identical down to the last digit. At 4:10 a.m., they called in the employee. He arrived from Terminal 2 looking confused. He had his ID clipped to his jacket, same name, same photo. The security tech scanned it, valid. They checked ours again, valid. Two identical functioning credentials, both registered to the same person. It wasn't a security breach in the usual sense. It was something worse because the system couldn't tell which one was real. By morning, the investigation started. They ran through access logs, CCTV footage, all of it. The cameras outside Hangar C-12 had gone dark at 2:59 a.m., 8 minutes before the alarm went off. No recorded footage of anyone entering or leaving. When the feed came back online at 3:11, the door was already closed, the same as when we arrived. Nothing moved, no figures, no vehicles. A team checked the badge itself for duplication signs, microprint inconsistencies, holographic errors, but it was flawless. Even the internal RFID chip had the correct encryption signature. There was no technical explanation for it. The logs showed two authentic signals from two different places, both approved by the same server. By the end of the shift, my uncle looked drained. He turned in the badge to the investigators and filled out a long report. When we left around 7 a.m., the sun was coming up, the fog finally breaking apart into streaks of gold and gray over the tarmac. The terminals were waking up again, passengers returning, engines starting, but the hangar sat out there on the edge of the property like a forgotten piece of machinery, quiet and sealed again. Over the next week, I asked him if they ever figured it out. He just shook his head. The employee was cleared. His badge worked fine, and the logs were eventually corrected in the system, whatever that meant. The second one we'd found was tagged as a data anomaly and moved to evidence storage. They shut down the alarm system in that hangar entirely, citing false triggers. Months later, he told me something that stuck with me. The week after Thanksgiving, a different team did a full equipment check in that same hangar. Everything looked fine, just as before. But when they did a sweep with the RFID scanner, it picked up a faint signal from under the concrete floor near the center of the hangar. Same ID frequency, same employee number. When they checked again a few hours later, the signal was gone. They never found anything under the floor. The area was solid concrete, poured decades ago. No panels, no access hatch, nothing. The scanner never picked it up again after that day. He didn't talk much about that shift afterward, but every time we drove near the western perimeter roads, he'd look toward the distant shape of Hangar C-12 through the fence line. It's still there, still sealed, just another old building among dozens that dot the edges of JFK. But that night stuck with me. The cold, the smell of oil, the way the badge gleamed under the flashlight. Too new for a place so old. There was no ghost, no hidden figure, nothing chasing us. Just a perfect living duplicate of something that shouldn't have existed, and a silence that never felt fully empty again. I worked ground operations at Fairbanks International during winters, mostly guiding planes with light wands and handling late-night tarmac checks. The job wasn't complicated, but the cold made everything feel like punishment. At that latitude, winter isn't just a season, it's a kind of silence. The sun barely rises and the temperature stays below zero for weeks. By January, everything you touch feels frozen, from the metal railing on the stairs to the inside of your lungs when you breathe too deep. My shifts usually started in the evening and went into the early morning. Nights were always quieter, just a few cargo flights, some red-eye connections, and the constant hum of ground heaters trying to keep engines from freezing. The airfield lights, long lines of blue and white dots stretching across black ice, were sometimes the only color against the endless dark. When you spend that much time outside in 25 degrees, your brain starts doing strange things with sound and distance. Every small noise feels amplified, and every moving shadow seems closer than it really is. That night started like any other. It was around 1:30 a.m., and I was sitting in the operations shack near runway 2L, drinking coffee that had already gone cold. My radio crackled, breaking the stillness. A pilot taxiing toward the hangars said he saw runway lights flickering about halfway down 2L. We'd had maintenance earlier in the day, but everything was signed off as clear. A flicker could mean bad wiring or a damaged control box. Either way, it needed checking before another plane came in. I put on my parka, grabbed the keys to the service truck, and drove out. The tires slid a little as I turned onto the access road. The runway looked endless ahead of me, a thin band of light stretching into the dark. The radio chatter faded as I drove farther from the terminal, replaced by the muffled rumble of the truck engine. My breath clouded the windshield even with the defroster running full blast. At first, the lights looked fine. The cold air makes them shimmer sometimes, and from a distance it can look like flickering. But when I got closer to the midpoint of the runway, I noticed one light panel flashing differently. Short bursts, uneven intervals. It wasn't random, though. There was a rhythm to it. 2 quick flashes, a pause, 1 long, another pause, then 2 more. It looked deliberate, like Morse code. I parked on the shoulder, keeping the engine idling, and got out. The air hit me like a wall. Even through the thick gloves, I could feel my fingers starting to sting. The snow crunched in that brittle way it only does when it's far below freezing. I walked toward the light panel, my flashlight beam bouncing across the snow and ice. The flickering kept up, steady and oddly timed. When I got close enough, I saw something strange. Footprints, small, distinct impressions leading away from the light and off the runway's edge toward the tree line. Stopped for a moment, thinking maybe one of the maintenance guys had been out here earlier, but that made no sense. It was almost 2 in the morning, and the area should have been locked down after inspections. I crouched beside the prints. They weren't from boots. They were bare feet. You can tell the difference right away. Boot treads leave a deep patterned outline. These had the clear shape of toes and arches. The snow around them had crystallized, the way it does when moisture hits the surface and freezes instantly. Whoever made them wasn't out there long, but even a minute in that temperature barefoot would tear skin apart. I followed the prints with my flashlight. They went maybe 20 feet toward the dark tree line, perfectly straight, and then just stopped. No scuff marks, no sign of someone turning back, nothing. Just stopped in the middle of the snow. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. My mind kept trying to reason it out. Maybe someone lost a shoe and ran back before their other foot sank in. But there were no partial prints, no overlap, no signs of direction change. Just a clean trail that ended. I stood there for a long moment, the only sound being the hum of the idling truck and the soft buzz from the runway lights. The flickering had stopped now, like it had finished whatever it was doing. I checked the control panel box nearby. No exposed wires, no condensation, no animal damage. The system was intact. I drove back to the operations shack and called it in, reporting the light malfunction and the footprints. The airport safety supervisor told me to mark off the section of runway until morning and to get some rest. I stayed an extra hour watching from the truck just to see if it happened again. The lights stayed steady the rest of the night. The next day, the FAA maintenance team came out for a full inspection. They checked every circuit, every junction box, even dug a little around the base of the light where the prints had started. Nothing. Wiring was dry, no signs of shorts or damage. They logged it as no fault found. I knew what I saw, though. The lights had flashed deliberately, and those prints had been bare feet. You don't mistake something like that when you've worked enough winters out there. I tried not to think about it too much. Everyone out there has their stories. Odd noises, unexplained sensor triggers, things like that. When you work through long Alaskan nights, your body's always fighting exhaustion and cold. Sometimes it's easy to doubt your own senses. But I couldn't shake the image of those prints stopping mid-field. It kept replaying in my head, especially when I was out alone doing night checks. A week later, same time, 1:30 a.m., a pilot radioed in again. He said the lights on 2L were flickering halfway down. I was off that night, but I heard about it the next morning. Same section, same pattern of flashes. I asked the guy who went out what he found. He said the lights were steady by the time he got there. No footprints, no sign of anything wrong. After that, the airport added extra camera coverage near that section. I checked the footage later out of curiosity. The night the second report came in, you could see the lights flicker faintly, almost rhythmic. The camera resolution wasn't great in low light, but you could tell it wasn't just a random glitch. The snow was smooth, no footprints, no movement, nothing visible. The lights just flashed for about a minute, then went back to normal. Maintenance eventually replaced the entire circuit line along that stretch. They even swapped the ground transformers in case of power surges, though none were recorded. Afterward, the flickering stopped completely. No more reports. Still, every winter night I worked after that, I'd find myself glancing at that same section when I was out guiding in the dark. There was something unsettling about it. Not fear exactly, but unease, like the place itself remembered. Sometimes, when the air was perfectly still, I'd stand there with the light wands in my hands, the faint sound of the wind brushing over the frozen field, and I'd look toward the tree line. The snow there always looked smooth, untouched, but every now and then, under the right angle of light, I'd think I saw faint shapes, like shallow impressions, half buried under frost. Never enough to prove anything, just enough to make me stay a little longer before heading back inside. In Fairbanks, the darkness stretches for months. You stop trying to understand the strange things it hides. You just learn to work around them. And whenever a pilot called in about a light flicker after that, I'd always make sure someone else went to check.